While today we think of Athens as the birthplace of Western civilization and the high-water mark of Greek culture, it was Sparta that many Golden Age Greeks admired most.
They were really thought of as a kind of an ideal of Greek civilization. But it was a utopia in the sense that it was dedicated to an ideal of virtue, of service to the community, of selflessness and unity.
What the Greek city-state valued most of all was freedom from foreign intervention, a sense of belonging, and success on the battlefield. Sparta was abundant in all three.
During Sparta's reign, ancient Greece was a collection of more than 1,000 self-governing communities called city-states.
A city-state is really a city which functions for all practical purposes like a state or a nation, has its own government, its own army, its own navy, and its own laws. There were all of these states everywhere, many of them very remarkable for their culture.
Sparta dates back to the 12th century BC, a time of great change in the ancient world, when Egyptian power was waning and the Second Babylonian Empire was on the rise. According to Greek legend, Sparta began with violence and conquest, when in 1150 BC, invaders from the north, who believed themselves to be descendants of Hercules, moved south to reclaim what they believed to be their ancestral land. When King Lacedaemon took over the Central Peninsula, he named it Laconia after himself. He named the central capital Sparta after his queen. For nearly 400 years, until roughly 750 BC, Sparta was Laconia's religious, cultural, and governmental center. Art and music flourished.
Sparta is known for its beautiful choruses of singing women. The Spartans have a very attractive pottery that was traded. They were famous for bronze working.
These are very early examples of Laconian artistry. No fine art of Spartan origin has been found that dates after the 7th century BC. It's as if the people of Sparta just stopped making it.
The turning away from the kinds of visual arts that we see as prominent elsewhere is very clearly a self-conscious decision.
It was a decision that coincided with the greatest turning point in Sparta's history, a period known as the Messenian Wars. It began when a population explosion forced Sparta to seek new land and new sources of food.
They solved their problem by annexing an entire country which was both larger in population and territory than Sparta was. So that quirk of fate, that will change the course of Spartan history for the next 300 years.
The land they chose to take over was Messenia, a separate Dorian community directly to the west.
There's really nothing to make Sparta look absolutely strange and distinctive until the conquest of Messenia and its aftermath.
Messenia had rich farmland and a thriving agricultural economy. Today, it is where the famous Kalamata olives are grown. Messenia was also surrounded by rich stores of iron, Greece's most precious commodity for military equipment. Sparta needed Messenia, but the Messenians did not go quietly.
This was a long and hard war. The Spartans were not able to put down Messenian resistance easily or quickly.
The initial difficulty is simply topographical, getting over Mount Taygetos, which at its peak is 8,000 feet. But of course you don't go over the peak, you go round the side, and that means a detour, and that means marching a very long way. So you're very far from your base.
The people of Messenia were on their way to creating their own city-state culture. They resisted, they tried to remain independent, but the Spartans defeated them.
It would take nearly 100 years for Sparta to fully overtake the Messenians. But by the 7th century BC, Sparta ultimately controlled 8,000 square kilometers and became the largest city-state in the Greek Empire. the Messenians were forced to work the land as agricultural serfs called helots.
Helotage is a kind of tenant farming. A helot has a farm to which he must dedicate a certain part of every year's produce to a Spartan master. A particular Spartan master is in charge of each helot's farm, and yet the master doesn't actually own that helot as an out-and-out slave. He can't buy him and sell him.
No other city-state tried to enslave an entire Greek people. There's probably 250,000 residents of Messenia, and Spartan society is coalesced around 10,000 Spartan warriors. So they're vastly outnumbered.
We ought to think of Sparta as a state under siege. In some sense, there's an analogy here to modern Israel. Now, of course, there are many, many differences, but the Spartans and the Israelis have this in common, that they cannot afford the luxury of giving up their security needs.
The situation called for the Spartans to remake their society from top to bottom. They developed new rules that would control every aspect of its citizens' lives.
They are the only Greek population that devotes itself entirely to the arts of war.
According to the Greek historian Plutarch, the architect of this new warrior city-state was a Spartan lawmaker named Lycurgus. Lycurgus reportedly traveled throughout the Mediterranean, gathering the best of military statecraft from Crete, from Ionia, and from Egypt. He also received divine guidance from the oracles at Delphi, where it was said advice from Apollo was transmitted directly to him. With these new discipline guidelines, Sparta eventually transformed itself into a great militaristic society.
The armies, or the defenders in those days, were really just militias. They were just farmers taking down spears from above the fireplace and getting out there and fighting. Lycurgus, the original founding Spartan, so to speak, I think he just kind of said, hey, let's turn pro here. And then the whole society sort of unspooled from that decision, for good or ill.
His laws prevailed because they came with the authority of the Delphic oracle. And the oracle said that these laws should be obeyed as though they were divine laws.
Lycurgus may have been a man or the instrument of a legend. But in either event, the Spartans believed that it was Apollo's God-given wisdom that led them to create a master plan for Sparta. Their society was based on a pyramid of power. At the top were the roughly 10,000 men of the Spartan elite. They were called in Greek the homoioi, meaning the equals. In theory, each would have the same wealth and the same say in the government.
The goal was to make a society of equals, an army that could fight and where there would be no dissension, a polity that had unity.
Everything aims at homogeneity, similarity, if you will, and that is one of the keys to the Spartan system. We're going to have stability, we're going to have order, we're going to have obedience.
Below the homoioi were the roughly 50 to 60,000 free people who lived throughout Laconia, mostly on the outskirts of the capital city of Sparta. They were called the perioikoi, the dwellers around.
They allowed them to be independent, except that they couldn't make any political decisions. And they also compelled them to follow the Spartans whithersoever they may lead.
The perioikoi were essentially a non-voting middle class that kept the homoioi prepared for war.
The great bulk of the trade and the manufacturing, the craftsmanship that was necessary to maintain Spartan society, somebody had to make them weapons after all, was done by these perioikoi.
They were the engine that made it all work, because they freed the Spartan peers so that they had full leisure time to train athletically and every other way for war.
All pursuits not essential to the new Spartan machine were abandoned.
I think it's clear that one of the prices the Spartans paid for this solution to their problem was a cultural deprivation that they imposed on themselves. Because artistic creativity requires a degree of freedom that I think would have made them nervous.
At the bottom, and outnumbering everyone else, were the helots. The wives and daughters of the Spartan elite ran their households. This system left the equals responsible only to the polis, their Greek city-state.
They were willing to go to what turned out to be extreme measures to shape a state the like of which no one had ever seen before, and I suppose nobody has really seen since.
In the decades to come, Sparta would devise a new system of government that would control every citizen from cradle to grave.